And welcome back to the morning show. And joining us in studio this morning is Judge Eileen Riordan. She is currently a judge in the 5th Judicial District in District 1, which I guess the county, she resides in Eddy, but her cases cover all of southeast New Mexico here. She is a current judge there and running for the position again here. Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well.
Well, first off, thank you for spending time with us. Appreciate that. And, your position, we're in that season of politics and candidates and everybody running for office, and it's a busy time. But and of course, everyone's big D, big R, big all of this. But your position as a judge is kind of out of all of that, and I know we'll get philosophy here. I want to ask you some opinions on some of that stuff, but it's unique because you're not. Most when we talk elections, that's the legislative side of government. Where your senators, your representatives, these are people that make decisions to make laws. But judges, they're in a different. They're not in the legislative side. They're not creating laws. They're here to interpret and enforce. So it's a different ball of wax than what big D, big R's. At the end of the day, a judge interprets the law that's already provided, and then it goes accordingly with that, with the sentencing or whatever it is. So I guess my first question is why do you think that the judges' races, and even sheriff for that matter, why are they partisan races? Where you look at city elections, of course, you have a lot of experience on the city side as well too. But why do we like municipal elections, in your opinion, versus a judge or something? Why are they not also like a municipal election, unpartisan?
Well, New Mexico has tried to make a combination of factors in a judicial position work. To be appointed to the bench, which I was, you have to go in front of a bipartisan committee that is appointed of a number of members, and it has to be evenly divided between the parties. It has some non-party people on it as well. And that is a completely qualifications-based evaluation.
Gotcha.
And so that, for me, happened in November. And the Constitution sets forth some minimum requirements about age and years of licensure. But then beyond that, it's up to the commission to evaluate. And so that's a nonpartisan step. They try to make it, as I said, the commission's bipartisan. It's supposed to be a nonpartisan step. After that, though, we are being elected in your first election as a judge can be a contested election. And with that, you run as a partisan, you run as a Democrat, you run as a Republican, however. And then after that, whoever has made it through one potentially partisan election, after that, it's a retention system.
Okay.
And the state has what's called it's an evaluation that occurs at the state level that is done, that is, again, supposed to be nonpartisan, and it evaluates sitting judges as to how have you been doing? Are you keeping up with your cases? There are evaluations sent out to attorneys, to litigants, to court staff saying, what is this judge like? Should she be retained? Should she not? And then, so after your first election, all elections after that are retention elections where, again, it's not partisan. And a judge has to, I think, get a 57% approval rate. It's slightly above 50%.
Gotcha.
So it is this weird combination of both an initially bipartisan, then partisan, then back to nonpartisan.
Sure.
So why the state did it that way? I think we're the only state that does it with that exact sequence of events. But I think they tried to. The parties didn't want to give up having some say in the judicial races, but they wanted to try to balance it with completely qualifications based.
And I can understand it to a point where you can, maybe you get a general idea about someone or something like that, but really, at the end of the day, you're a person that is interpreting the law and then using your expertise to determine what needs to happen next. You know what I mean? And whether because for folks that don't know, interviews with judges are almost more educational than pulping for judge. You know what I mean? It's like, I got to educate you on what my job is. and because a lot of people just think it's People's Court or Judge Judy or something. And that's one sliver of the job and what you see. And to be honest, that's television court. That's not a courthouse. And that's a very rudimentary way of how court works is Judge Judy. You know what I mean? That's
I think any profession you see on TV, I mean, if you ever talk to officers, police officers, they'll tell you like cop procedurals get it all wrong. And,
Yeah.
and I know sometimes as a lawyer, as a judge, I would see something on a police procedural and it's like they're kicking in the door or not getting a warrant. And you're thinking, no. That's not how you do it. But for one of the odd things about being, let me draw that back. One of the things you most commonly think of when you think of as the court system and judges, you think of justice as blind. And so it is true. My politics, my personal politics, whatever they may be, have to be left at the door.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to bring those in. I'm supposed to walk through that door, listening to the facts provided to me by the parties, and then apply the law. And as a district court judge, as a trial judge, I'm not really even, what happens at the Court of Appeals. They have a lot more power in the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court to say, how should this law be interpreted?
Gotcha.
I, as a trial judge, am supposed to listen to what the Court of Appeals and what the New Mexico Supreme Court and what the federal courts have said the law, if you're looking at this law, this is how it should be applied to facts such as yours. Mm-hmm. So I am not supposed to bring through the door my partisan affiliation or my personal beliefs. I'm supposed to apply the law to the facts. And that's why you see that justice is blind concept. Is
Sure.
that I'm not supposed to take into consideration extraneous factors. I'm supposed to look at the facts as presented to me and apply the law.
Sure. And for folks that aren't familiar here, of course, the judge prior to being a judge for a long time was the attorney for the city of Carlsbad. So to be a city attorney for that long, obviously you've gained a lot of wisdom and experience in city law, government law, how that works, which, by the way, is a completely different animal than private things, the way people are done in private. I mean, as far as the procedures on how you do things and some of that.
One of the nice things, I initially I came down in 1990 after having graduated from law school. I came down to Carlsbad, and I was the law clerk for the 5th Judicial District. And it was a position that rotated every year between the 5th Judicial District is comprised of Chavez, Eddy, and Lee counties. Mm-hmm. And so there was just one law clerk at that time, and it's they don't even have the program anymore. But at the time, there was one, and it rotated between the 3 counties. I was there in Carlsbad. I worked for Judges Watson and Schuler and Jim Schuler, and I was there for a year. And then I went into private practice in a small firm. And one of the things when you work in a small firm in a smaller town is you do tend to take whatever comes through the door. It's criminal, it's civil, it's domestic, it's probate, it's land use, it's all those. And at that time, Carlsbad did not have a full-time attorney. And the law firm I worked at, which was Rosenberg and Davis, they had the contract to provide the city of Carlsbad with legal services.
Gotcha.
So I start with Rosenberg and Davis, and I took over the prosecutions in city court. I did that for over 25 years.
Did you draw the short straw, or did you want to do that?
I wanted it. It's the nice stuff about city court is it's not going to be the big matters.
Sure.
But it's going to be a lot of interesting fact patterns and a lot of that trial work. And I was interested in trial work. And again, it's not going to be a 10-week trial.
Sure.
But it's going to be a lot of being in court and trying cases. Yeah. And so I loved that. And I loved working with all the branches of the city. Even through city court, you're working with the police department. You might be working with animal control. You might be working with code enforcement. You might be working with the building department. And all of that helped me understand, even having graduated from law school, the ability to understand how a community works and what all it takes to make it run well was to me very interesting. You can see it from the outside, but until you've worked with it, you don't necessarily know everything that's part of it. But after I'd been with Rosenberg and Davis for a number of years, the city wanted a full-time attorney.
Gotcha.
And so then I applied, I got hired, and I was there for a little over 25 years. And again, I was the only attorney that they had on staff. And again, like being at a small law firm, it was the jack of all trades kind of thing. It might be a criminal case that walks through the door. Maybe it was a land use case. Maybe it was a utilities issue. Maybe it was a contract issue. Clearly, there was the administrative side. When you look at administration, it might be drafting ordinances. It might be drafting resolutions. It might be assisting counsel. It might be working with the cemetery board. It could be planning and zoning, dealing with subdivision.
Sure.
It might be civil rights. Occasionally, people don't think that domestic law comes into your role when you're essentially a corporate attorney, but it does. Whether it's somebody walking through the door over a child support issue that the city was on being wages were garnished or anything like that. So again, it was just this incredible variety. And that was one of the things I really liked. Now, in some of the bigger communities in New Mexico, and I know Bernalillo County is one of them, when you become a district court judge, you're a trial judge. And in some of the bigger communities, the cases get divided again by topic. Maybe one judge does criminal,
Gotcha.
one judge does civil, one judge does juvenile,
Sure.
one judge does...
Based on probably their expertise or experience. Yeah.
Well, no, not in the fifth.
You're a jack of all trade in the fifth.
Right. And so again, all those 25 years of working with all those different topics has come into play in this job. It's domestic, it's civil, it's land use.
Sure.
It's all of those.
It's kind of like medical field where, you got the family small town doc that's got to treat everything versus the big city doctor that just does back surgery all day or something. Like same concept.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. I mean, because you have that same kind of, it's a little bit of everything. The one thing that does come with I'm Division I, and the one thing that comes with Division I that is not shared between the other judges in all of the fifth is water law. So water law cases are assigned directly to my court.
So you deal with strictly Eddy County water issues.
Well, Eddy, Chavez, and Lee. Because again, it's all of the fifth.
Gotcha. Okay. And we're
so,
part of the fifth, and Lee and Eddy are Chavez counties, yes.
And so having come from the city where, again, the city held water rights. We held subterranean rights. We held Capitan rights. We held Ogallala rights. We had surface rights. We had irrigation rights. All of that work has, interestingly enough, also come over with me into my position as a judge.
And I'm sure that's a whole ball of wax in and of itself.
It is a distinct field of law, and as you say, like back surgeons, it is natural resources and water law in particular are things that some attorneys specialize in.
Well, I always hear the saying, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. And that's kind of that. And in this part of the country, that's a pretty true statement with other states and I mean, Texas and other counties.
We have the compact specifically with the Pecos. Other rivers in New Mexico, like the Rio Grande has a compact as well. But the Pecos has a compact where New Mexico has to look at how much water is delivered to Texas. You look at like flood inflows, you look at runoff, you look at all those things. We also have, with the boom in the oil and gas industry, you have as populations grow, all of that puts a demand on water.
Sure.
So everything from farming and ranching to municipal populations or just populations at all, those all oil and gas industries. Some of the extraction industries look at that. I mean, it's a huge area.
I just spawned another set of questions there, kind of thing. But it's kind of curious. This is just a gee whiz wonder thing. With you talk oil and gas and you talk about the booms and things. Does that change your caseload in that where when there's more population, you're tending to see more criminal stuff versus civil, or does that impact that at all?
You'll see a raise in almost every area. The minute you get more population, you're going to get everything in the domestic, which may be child custody, child support, divorces, anything like that. Obviously, the more people you have, the larger your caseload.
Sure.
You'll also look at it with some of the what's called in the profession PI, personal injury. Again, some of those industries, because of the heavy physicality of them, you're more likely to see injuries. Maybe it's what you've seen is some of the injuries on the highway where there's been accidents involving oil and gas vehicles or just traffic in general.
Sure. Workman's comp issues.
Now, workman's comp in New Mexico is handled by a workers' comp commission.
Okay, so that doesn't really come to district courts unless it gets
pulled out of
gotcha.
There. So again, that is something that we don't see as much of. But anytime you get a boom in population, you're going to get a boom in certain areas. Obviously, with like contract law, land use law, anytime you get more people spilling in or oil and gas, what oddly enough, you wouldn't think of it, but oil and gas has also increased what you see in the probate field. And what has happened is maybe
I can imagine that.
Maybe in an old probate, somebody didn't deal with land ownership. Maybe they didn't realize somebody owned mineral interests. So grandma died. We didn't realize she had mineral interests. Because there was no activity on those mineral interests, nobody came knocking on our door.
And then finally somebody came
30
along.
years later, somebody's wanting to access those minerals, and now they're knocking on your door saying, okay, we see that Grandma Betty died 30 years ago. Who owns those minerals now? And they have to reopen or for the first time open a probate to figure out who those minerals are now held by.
And then sometimes the person that probably owns it don't realize they own it till they dig into the probate and
yeah.
then you get the letter from the long lost uncle left you something kind of situation.
And you'll see that. And sometimes what you have are just hugely complex deals where there's many people involved in an area that had some interest in, or at least a potential interest in the mineral interest. And now they're having to sort through the oil and gas companies are coming in. They want to know if we develop these minerals, who are we going to pay? Mm-hmm. And so they have to go back in and find anybody who is living, try to get people to probate stuff if the original owners have passed away and the rights have not been appropriately transferred. So even these weird kind of tendrils will leak into other areas where you're thinking, what would oil and gas have to do with Grandma Betty's probate from 30 years ago?
Well, pretty much if it involves people in any way, shape, or form, it's connected in some way. At the end of the day, it really is.
Well, and if people are going to argue over it, eventually the legal system's going to get involved. So
exactly.
Well, hopefully.
You've been serving as the judge, the District 5, Division 1, but about a year and a half now.
Year and a half.
Roughly.
I started at the very beginning of January 2021.
Very good. So just a hair over a year and a half here. I guess my question is, what's the lessons learned? Like in this year and a half of being the fifth district judge here, what's been the lessons learned from you? Things you've taken away that either you didn't expect or, you know what, this is the way I should do it now as a judge versus as a city attorney.
Well, one of the things that I noticed first was in my role as a city attorney, a lot of times there was the need to build consensus. Mm-hmm. And, with the city, there was a mayor, there were 9 council members, and then you had the public, you had different departments, and there was a lot of consensus building. So I think one of the very first things that struck me was, only less than a month into this, we were at the end of a hearing, and I said, well, what I think we're going to do, or maybe what the best thing we should do is, and I realized, well, no, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. As
Sure.
the judge, I'm going to make this decision. And I had to, there is still a need to develop, a consensus, but there is also that you make the decision. In the end, I'm responsible for my decision. I need to announce it. I need to come to that decision.
Sure.
And as much as I want people to come along with me, that's not always required.
Sure.
So that was one of the first things that struck me.
That you can't always be everyone's friend, sort of, a little, or at least try to. You know what I mean?
Didn't have to build consensus because in my old job that was very much a part of it, was trying to get all parties to kind of come together.
Yeah.
And with this, it's like, no, they've come to me because they can't come together.
Sure, and you're the one who needs to put them together.
Right.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. Yeah, your role turns from being peace. I mean, yes and no, but being that peacemaker to saying at the end of the day, I'm going to resolve this whether you agree with me or not.
Right.
Kind of mentality.
Well, and there is a value to parties having a clear and timely decision. Mm-hmm. I mean, and not to tomorrow or let's continue to talk. And so part of what is needed in a good judge is that ability to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is my decision. If you don't like it, there are rights to appeal. Then you need to proceed with those. And if I'm wrong, the Court of Appeals or the New Mexico Supreme Court will certainly tell me.
Sure.
But you need a decision. And oftentimes by the time people have made it into court, they feel like a lot of time has been spent trying to resolve it and not resolving it.
Sure.
And so you have to be aware of that. I think one of the other things, but I think everybody has felt this, is how teleworking has played into this, into what has happened with the pandemic. And the nice thing is that the courts have moved more to online hearings, and I think especially in a district as large as ours, where you're talking about Eddie Chavez and Lee
counties. A lot of real estate between towns.
Right.
Yeah.
The nice thing is you can try your case and you can remain in Roswell. The other attorney may be in Carlsbad. You can have your clients with you there in Roswell. They can have their clients there in Carlsbad. And we're not asking you to commute anymore. So there was that adjustment to more of an online work.
And I imagine by default, it also streamlines your docket a little bit and allows things to happen a little quicker and maybe a little bit smoother, too.
Well, and to a certain degree safer. For example, like criminal arraignments. It used to be that if a defendant was in jail, he or she would have to be brought over. It would take detention officers. They would have to bring them over. They would have to sit with them while they're waiting their turn for their hearing. And nowadays, those are held when a person is in custody. Mm-hmm. they remain at the jail. And so they are appearing telephonically. And for the jail, that's so much easier.
Absolutely.
It's so much safer.
How
for
many
everybody
times do we
involved.
hear whenever there's a convict escaped or something, it's always in those transit situations.
Right.
They're transferred to and from court or to and from something. They're not, generally it's not while they're sitting in a jail, it's when they're going to and from someplace.
So to me, this is for the jail. It's more economical
Yeah,
and it's
makes
safer
sense.
for them. They're not having to worry about who has that prisoner been in contact with. Has somebody tried to hand them something or approach them when they shouldn't? Has the prisoner tried to escape? Well, no, they're not. They're leaving their cell and going down the hallway,
It's
but
not
they're
a
not
factor
leaving the
anymore.
building.
Yeah. I got one more question, and it's more of a convoluted, but just a curiosity one. Where, obviously, when it comes to determine a case's outcome, the law tells you which way to go on that. But when it comes to sentencing and things, that's where you get a little bit of latitude, right, on how to decide what happens next here. For you, how is that thought process? How does that? Because as someone who's not an expert in the law, a lot of us probably lean on emotion. Well, this guy's been a bag of garbage for years. Why do we keep seeing this person? Things, but the law doesn't work that way. And what you can do, you're a human being. There's probably people you see day in and day out, and you're like, why do I keep seeing the same person? Why is it? You know what I mean? And so, how do you do that? How do you make that decision problems where you don't let your emotions come into play, but at the same time, your emotion may be the same emotion as the community and needs something to, you know what I'm saying? How do you make that balance where this is more about the community and not about me?
For a lot of it, not all cases, but for a number of cases, the prosecution and defense come up with an agreement. And in exchange for, Bob changing his plea, we've agreed that this is the sentence that will be applied.
Yeah.
And a lot of times for the prosecution, they're weighing a number of factors. The majority of which is how likely am I to win at trial? Maybe they're having problems with a witness.
Sure.
Somebody is very traumatized. They don't want to come to court. You're looking at a child victim. You don't want to put them through that trauma. And so the state often gives up a little because they're assessing the strengths and weaknesses of their case.
Sure.
And defense is doing the same thing. They're looking at the strengths and weaknesses of their case. So when they come to you with an agreement as to sentence, then you could completely reject the agreement, or you could adopt the agreement and they've agreed to a sentence. A number of times, though, there's been a trial, there's not been a plea agreement, and the person's been convicted, or there's sometimes changes of plea where there has not been an agreement as to sentence. The state might make a recommendation. There are certain resources that are available. Sometimes the corrections department becomes involved and they might give you an assessment about what they suggest. I look at a variety of factors. I do look strongly at somebody's history.
Yeah.
Or have you learned your lesson? For some people, they have not been in trouble before. At least they've never been charged or
Sure.
convicted before. And you're thinking, what went wrong here? Why did this behavior occur? Other times you're looking and you're like, this person has a very lengthy criminal history. They're not learning their lesson. And maybe some of the options that you might offer to a first-time offender, you're thinking, no, this person's either had that
It's a
offered
waste
to
of
them,
time
and
and
it's a waste. I also look at the severity of the crime.
Sure.
Obviously, with different offenses, there are maximum and minimum penalties that may be set forth on those. So when you get convicted of a fourth-degree felony versus a second-degree felony, your options for how long or what the minimum amount is vary. New Mexico does have a habitual offender statute that says if you have certain prior felonies that occurred before this offense, those will be used to enhance or increase your sentence in this case. So that affects it as well. But, you look at the offense. I oftentimes look to see the effect on the community. Sometimes it's very much an individual that's been very affected. You'll see those in batteries and robberies where you have a victim, a true, this was me versus you, and
Sure.
you were the victim. You can also see it more generally on a community level. We've seen that with embezzlements, with multiple thefts, where this is a person that's victimizing a large swath of the community. And I take that into account as well. I believe that, the only person that can change your behavior in the end is you.
At the end of the day. Yeah.
And I will, if it is an issue that maybe some rehabilitative things will help fix whatever is going on,
Sure.
then great. But if those have been offered and they are not working for you, then that's it.
Sure.
We're looking at at severe jail time.
I would imagine too. You get, and I'm hoping you've had a few of these moments in the year and a half since you've sat in the bench there. But I'm sure you get moments too where your sentencing is the lesson learned. Like what I mean by that is like you get someone that, like you said, doesn't have a lengthy criminal history, did something just dumb, and you're like, what were you thinking? And you're like, this person doesn't necessarily. It's not going to benefit anybody to throw them in jail for an eternity or whatever. And so you say, all right, I realize, you screwed up pretty bad. Let's do something to kind of make you understand that this is a bad thing to do, but we don't want to destroy your life at the same time doing it. And so I'm glad you get those moments where someone like that comes in and you give them, they go through a program or something, and then they come out on the other side. Now they're a better person. Do you have those? Have you had those moments where you get to see some of those people and say, thanks, Judge, for not throwing the hammer at me? Now I'm doing great. Thank you. I mean, do you have some of those going on?
Well, especially looking back at my times as a prosecutor in city court, where there's just been more time to see those people.
Sure, yeah, you've had a lot more experience there.
And I can think of, in particular, when you were describing this, what immediately came to mind was a case where it was an adult, but somebody, I don't think yet 30, and they had picked up a DWI, and she walks into court, and she's quietly crying the whole time. It wasn't that sort of theatrical thing. It was a quiet crying. And the officer leans over to me and he said, she's been doing that since I stopped her. And I looked at her record. She had no prior DWIs, nothing. There is some mandatory sentencing she went through. But what really dawned on me was merely being stopped by the police and facing this
was enough
for her. Now, I could also say that I had other people who walked in the door with their first DWI and they didn't care. They didn't think they were at fault. And I was fairly certain that unless they changed their attitude, they were going to be right back with this or some other offense.
They disagree with the legality of what they committed to begin with. So
They just don't see the seriousness of it.
Yeah.
And I thought, here's somebody who does, from the moment it happened, see the seriousness of it. And I could also look over and say, here's somebody who doesn't care and probably will be back involved in the criminal justice system repeatedly.
Gotcha.
And those are sad to see, the people that come and go. I mean, because in the end, what we want is for this not to happen.
Sure.
We don't want you engaging in this behavior. You don't want your property stolen. You don't want your child hurt in a car accident. You don't want somebody to rob the bank. You don't want those things. And that's what we're trying to get to, is that you don't repeat that behavior and others don't follow in your footsteps.
Sure.
And it's, for the most part, for the people that I've had to sentence to some very serious jail time, most of those are still involved in that process at this point, because it's been a year and a half.
Sure.
And so they're still serving their time, or they're still in their probationary period.
So hopefully in your next term here, you might see them come out and say, thank you, Judge. I've turned my life around, and you started me on that path.
My thing is, I'd prefer never to see them again in my court.
You know what? That's probably, if you never see them again, then your job was done, and you're kind of like, but I'm sure that it makes your day when one of those folks come up and are very appreciative of at the time they may have not been, but hindsight 2020 they are now.
And I have had people come up to me from my days as a prosecutor. I have had a number of people come up who said, I don't know if you remember me, but and I've had one or two that were having problems apparently with alcohol or substance abuses, and they were saying, hey, I got into rehab because of hitting bottom, part of which was the criminal charges.
Well, and that's the beauty of it.
And we've had a cricket.
There we go. Sorry, I should have been better about that. But I think that's probably, I would guess, part of the best part of the job is that part where you see people that were down and have now come and are doing better, and you know what I mean? It's almost like a saved case or something like that.
And we can see that in multiple other areas besides criminal law. There's been adoptions where like somebody was in some fairly rough circumstances, or they were in an insecure part of their life, and now they found security. Maybe it's with another relative. Maybe it's with a truly kind of stranger adoption situation. And you see those give you a lot of satisfaction, where you think, this is somebody's life who's gotten better.
Yeah.
You can also see it in other areas where people have had issues to resolve. And sometimes it's not necessarily through the court process, but we've seen it in some fairly bitter contested divorces where you get them involved in a mediation or in parenting or a combination of those. And you see that they're able to work out a relationship between the two parents.
Sure.
And they're now able to adequately co-parent a child. And you can see sometimes in those where a child's life is better, the parent's life is better, the family is learning how to work together.
Sure.
Maybe we're not going to be a couple anymore. Maybe we can't be married.
But they can coexist.
We can coexist
Yeah.
and do our best for our children. And
Absolutely.
that's satisfying as well.
That's
very satisfying.
All right, one more of these questions, and then we got to wrap it up. Do you have a favorite type of case? Like, is there certain ones you're like, ooh, it's going to be a fun day. I got this kind of case
Well,
today.
I still really enjoy the criminal cases.
Okay.
Those are, one of the things about criminal cases, unlike civil, is there's some very tight timelines on those. So you can see a case begin and resolve fairly quickly. Civil litigation, just by its nature, involves a lot of out of court activity, a lot of discussions between the attorneys, a lot of discovery of evidence, a lot of interviewing and depositions and all that. And so those, as a judge, since you only see the parts that come into court, you lose track of them.
Sure.
Whereas the criminal cases are those that have a lot of rapid return to court things. And so you can kind of get the story told.
Yeah. Well, even burden of proof's different in criminal versus civil. And so that factors into the proceedings as well, too.
Yeah.
So before we let you go here, if folks want to learn more about your campaign, I know you have the website, you have your Facebook page.
Yes, we do.
I think your website was like judgeeileen.com.
Judge Eileen. Yes,
I think that was the right. And then, of course, just look for Judge Eileen Riordan on Facebook as well. I think it's like re-elect or campaign to elect Judge Riordan, something like that.
Keep.
To keep. That's a keep.
Yeah,
That's the one. But there you can like and follow, ask questions. If you want to get involved in volunteering to help campaign or pass out, signs and all that kind of stuff, they can reach out to you there.
There's a way to reach out directly to us through both the webpage and the Facebook page. There's a way to volunteer if you want, to assist, to offer assistance if there's other things you want to do that would help. So.
And if I understand right, you're on the ballot in all three counties, right?
Yes,
because you're in the 5th District, Division 1. It covers these. So if you live here in Chavez or in Eddy or Lee County, you will see Judge Eileen's name on the book there, or on the ballot there.
I will be there.
Awesome.
Thank
Is there
you.
anything you wanted to mention that we skipped or didn't get a chance to talk about?
No.
Awesome.
You've been pretty thorough here.
And then some, right?
Yeah.
Some people are like, man, you ask a lot of questions. But thank you very much.
You.
Thank you for serving, too. I'm sure you don't get this enough, is at the end of the day, it's a tough job, because like you said, you're not going to please everybody at the end of the day. And we do appreciate that service.
But that's something I also see as an overlap from my time with the city, is that being part of a community and just as like working with the city, I saw how I could affect and be a part of the community. I still see that in this job, that it's a different role, but there's still that interconnectivity with the rest of the community. And that, I will say, that is also one of the most satisfying things about this job.
Good deal. Well, thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Hopefully I get to see you in situations like this and not in your courtroom.
As I said, I hope not to see you there.
There you go. I'd rather see you at lunch and not in the courtroom. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right.